Welcome to this overview of the WebSphere capabilities of IntelliMagic Vision. We're currently in the WebSphere reports, more specifically in the report set for WebSphere transactions. Along the top of the screen, you can see 9 predefined mini charts with transaction and response time data. This chart shows the transaction rate for all of our WebSphere workload, broken down by cell. We're viewing a single day in 15-minute intervals. The x-axis covers midnight to midnight, and the y-axis is transactions per second. You see a prime shift increase in the transaction rates, and we also see that one cell has the lion's share. The legend on the right tells us which cell is represented by each color, and we can also hover over the data to see the cell name and transaction rate, interval by interval. A cell can have many clusters, and we now see the same transaction load split amongst 20 different clusters. Now, this is anonymized customer data, so the cell names are rather cryptic. In your environment, you'll have cluster names that follow your naming convention and are meaningful to you. In this data, we see a bubble in the early morning hours, so let's find out more about that. So let's see which requests are driving this. We see now that one particular transaction is causing the increase. Now, again, your URI names will be more realistic, and they'll indicate the application or the resource involved. But now, maybe next we'd like to know if this is a typical kind of thing. Here we have statistics about the transaction rate pattern for that specific URI over the past month. We can see the average, the minimum and maximum values, and percentile values to help us understand the workload patterns. In addition to transaction volumes, we also have response time data. This chart once again covers all of our WebSphere workload. The orange line represents transaction volumes, and the surface area data represents response times. We see a fairly typical pattern of faster response times during the day and longer running work at night. And we also get a breakdown of some of the components of response time. Now, most of the time here is the blue representing processing time within the servant region, which is what you want to see. But we do have some spikes of time to dispatch, which represents time spent in the WM queue waiting for a servant region. Now, descriptions of all these fields can be found by scrolling down on each screen. Transactions are grouped into transaction classes to assign work to WLM service classes with performance goals. So in addition to reporting by cells, clusters, nodes, and servers, you can also report by transaction class. Now in this chart, the WASTO class has the most delay. So drilling down to find out which URIs are impacted, we see that a single URI has most of the delay. Let's drill down on that URI by time to better understand what's going on. We see here that this URI had delays coinciding with transaction spikes. We don't have time here to pursue this any further, but you could analyze the data over multiple days or look at related data such as WLM or share your reports with colleagues for their analysis. But now let's move on to WebSphere CPU reporting. This chart is much like the transaction rates chart we saw earlier, but now we're looking at combined CPU and zIIP time. You can clearly see which cells consume more resource and see the patterns over time. Of course, you also want to be able to see the general purpose CPU time versus zIIP time. And here we see that although def cell consumes the most CPU overall, it's mostly zIIP time, so that's good in terms of lesser cost. ABC cell has the most general purpose CPU time. So let's drill down to see which URIs are contributing to that. Now we see CPU time by URI, and the top consumer is pretty clear. Not only is there a single URI consuming the most overall, but it's almost all general purpose CPU time. This is a top 30 chart, as you can see in the chart title. You may have hundreds of URIs in your environment, and that's way too many to be readable on a single chart. So IntelliMagic Vision will limit certain drill downs to a number that's manageable on a chart and sort them to show you the most important values. You can see that by clicking on Edit Report. The top N field specifies the top 30 URIs based on TCP time. And just like any other report, we could edit these values, we could add or subtract metrics to display, or make other customizations. These predefined reports are very useful and are based on feedback from technical experts and customers, but you have a lot of flexibility to change them or create new reports of your own. Maybe you prefer a top 10 report. Now let's look at data volume. Here we see that the data sent in with request to the D4 cell is greater than the data sent out in response. Now let's say a new application release was just rolled out in this cell. We might want to compare data from before and after the change to see how it impacts our metrics. In this case, we can see a lot less data being sent and received on D4 after the change. So if this is what we expected, we have confirmation and we can quantify the benefit. If it's not what we expected, we have something we need to investigate. The final set of WebSphere reports is the overview reports. Now, despite the name overview, these reports really pack a lot of useful data onto a single screen. So let's start with activity by transaction class. The overview reports are all tabular, and this one has most of the key data metrics we've been looking at by transaction class. You'll also see some things that we haven't seen yet, like CPU time per transaction and CPU time eligible for zIIP. Now, all these metrics could be graphed in charts if you choose, but they're collected here to put related metrics together in easy-to-use tables. Rows are sorted by default by transaction class name, but you can sort on any value you want by clicking on the arrows in the column headers. Now you can see by the mini charts across the top that you can get the same information broken down by cell or by cluster, like we saw in the other report sets. But here we have additional options as well. This report breaks the work down into different request types, such as HTTP, HTTPS, and MDBs. This one is the same data by URI type. The last two reports are transaction-focused, so they include transaction-oriented data, including rates and response times, as well as things like failed transactions and the response time component breakdown that we saw earlier. And as with all the other charts and reports, you can drill down for more information. For more details on WebSphere reporting, or how IntelliMagic Vision can help you leverage your SMF and RMF data to improve availability and enhance the effectiveness of your performance analysis across all your zOS infrastructure, check out the demos at IntelliMagic.com.